It's a pretty crazy thumbnail. I get it. Hold on. Let me explain, and I think you'll actually agree with me once I explain how I'm approaching this. What's up? My name is Dusk, and we got another Dead by Daylight video for you today where we're going to be talking about ways to help save the game. Now, before we get started on this topic and addressing the thumbnail, we need to establish some things first, and that is how behavior apparently seems to view their game and their player base. And unfortunately for killer players like myself and probably you, they really just look at us as 1/5 of the revenue stream and unfortunately a pretty easy part of their game to replace. In the past, really, they just have to come out with another license and then a couple of handful of buffs scattered around, and they get enough new killer players in to replace us, right? Now, that's a pretty crappy way to look at things, but behavior is pretty much just full corporate mode at this point. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here and defend him on that because the upkeep cost for Dead by Daylight has sort of like massively ballooned with licensing fees, a much larger staff that they have to pay in upkeep, server costs, international legal fees, probably a law department at this point. Did I mention translators? Yeah, you get it, right? Like it's a lot of upkeep, and having a chunk of your player base, survivors at this case, your golden goose section of your revenue starts heading out the door. You're going to panic and you're going to cater to them, right? So what does that have to do with the thumbnail? Well, the thumbnail is about realizing how behavior looks at us and understanding that we really can't do anything about that. Money talks, bullshit walks, right? We're dealing with a corporation at this point, right? So we have to talk their language. So there's two outcomes. We can cross our arms as killers and just sit off to the side and say this isn't fair, and let behavior and survivors just decide on their own what direction the game should go in and skip off together into the sunset while we suffer. Or we can be part of helping come up with a solution. That way we get to influence what that solution is, and we can hopefully help ensure that that solution also works for us so that we aren't left out in the cold. And that's what the thumbnail is about, right? We want to help cater to survivors so that we can make sure, and this is a little sneaky, but it's how you have to do things when you're dealing with a corporation. So in the last video I made, I did have some suggestions for one potential direction that Dead by Daylight could go in a way that would help solve the fun issue for the largely casual side of Dead by Daylight. And it was something that I think would technically work, but after watching a video by Hens, many of you probably know who Hens is. He's a pretty big creator, but in his video, he was one of the few big creators that I felt like had a lot of really good takes. I think everything he said felt really on point, and he actually brought some things to my attention that I had not really considered. So I took in everything from his video, and then took in a bunch of information from my own comment section, stuff that you all put out, some really good ideas that I liked. And then I came back, sat down with those, interjected some of my own ideas and my own understanding of game design, and came up with a much better solution to help alleviate tunneling, make Dead by Daylight more fun for the survivor, while also making it simultaneously more fun and interesting for the killer. And I actually think this is going to add more depth to the game and make it easier for behavior to balance. I know that sounds pretty lofty. You must be thinking, wow, this has got to be a whole lot of changes. And here's the other thing. It's not. It actually can't be. This is the one thing that Hens talked about a little bit that I hadn't really considered enough. I was taking into account the workload for it and how much workload behavior was willing to maybe, or could afford to put into it. But I hadn't really taken into account all this spaghetti code and technical debt that 9 years of Band-Aid fixing and shortcutting your own code and game design have really led to. And I realized that whatever solution we come up with basically can't involve any new mechanics at all. It's got to be recycling what's already in Dead by Daylight. So the solution itself almost has to be a partial Band-Aid fix in itself, which doesn't sound great, but I think it's the only path forward at this point. So first things first when it comes to tunneling, right? when you kind of need to understand how that works in the worst possible way from the perspective of the casual, right? For the casual player, they get into the game, they get hit by a killer that maybe they're not very good at kiting or getting away from. They get down, they get on the hook, they sit on the hook for a while, they get saved, and as soon as they get off the hook, there's the killer, and they run them down to a pallet, they get slugged, they sit next to the pallet for a while, and then eventually the killer picks them back up, they go sit on the hook, and then wash, rinse, and repeat. And they've basically spent about 90% of the game just sitting in their chair AFK, waiting for an opportunity to get to play the game. And they just don't. They do not get to play the game. And I know a lot of people have called for like, oh, it's just a skill issue, but let me turn you on to what's going on in the rest of the gaming world, right? The explosion of battle royales, the evolution of battle royales into extraction shooters. Why are those so successful? They're so successful because there's a lot of skill expression available, but a casual player who doesn't have the skill to really compete at those competitive levels still gets to go in and play the game. In a battle royale or an extraction shooter, you can still go in, hide, play stealthy, go look for loot, contend with AI, and do things that are still fun. You still get to play the game. And that's the key, right? Is that casual players may never win in a battle royale. And, it may be pretty rare that they pull off anything big in an extraction shooter. But they get to get loot. They get to go extract. They get to accomplish things. They get to play the game. They get to have fun. And in Dead by Daylight, that simply just isn't happening for the casual player base anymore. And part of that is just 9 years of a stagnant meta. Everybody in Dead by Daylight has just gotten so good at the game that we've created this skill bar that if you are not tall enough to ride this ride, if you can't pass the skill bar, you're just going to get pummeled. We need to make it so that players who can't meet the skill bar still get to come in and play the game and have fun. And not everybody even wants to get good at the game. Not everybody is here to push skill expression. Some people just want to play, a co-op / PvP horror game with their friends, and they just want to have a good time. And they should be able to do that. So in the suggestion, here's going to be my suggestion. First, I think we need to retool the elusive mechanic to just be the biggest get out of jail free card in the game. Probably give them like 4 seconds of really jacked up haste so that they can run super fast and just get super far, and then just have like an endurance effect for that entire time. Now, I know what you're thinking right there. You're like, well, this is definitely going to get weaponized, right? Well, what we can do is we can add something to the end of that 4 seconds, right? If they decide to stay behind and weaponize that effect against the killer, then we can apply a massive hinder at the end of it so that now they can't get away from the killer and they're just absolutely going to go back down and go back on the hook, right? Or whatever series of effects we need to do to make it a get out of jail free card. You could teleport them to a random locker on the opposite side of the map from the killer if you want. Maybe that's what the solution is. Whatever it is just a huge guaranteed get out of jail free card, and possibly an anti-weaponization mechanic, which would be like a huge hinder, or just turning it into a teleport so that they're just like gone, right? Something like that. Now, what do we want to do outside this hook mechanic? That alone might do it, but I think we should try to give killers an alternate route to winning the game besides hook states. And I think that's something that Dead by Daylight is desperately missing, because killers don't ever have a moment in a game where they have to think about like pivoting or how they want to handle things, unless you're playing one of the more interesting, more in-depth killers. I'm going to look at the Onryo. The Onryo has some interesting mechanics where she can work on things, and she can go between maybe working on hook states or the condemned status, or both, because those mechanics actually interact with each other a little bit. And that kind of gives the Onryo a way to pivot a little bit. And I think we can make an even more interesting version of that and make it base kit for all killers. So here's my idea. I think we take Devour Hope and we water it way down and make it way weaker, but then we make it base kit, and we don't make it a hex totem. It's just there. So the things we're going to remove from it, we'll remove the speed boost that it gives. We'll remove the ability to one-shot down. Don't need that. That's too powerful. But we will keep that if you want to get a token, you have to be away from the hook. Which is interesting because as a base kit, and as this becomes part of meta, survivors will then be in a situation where they can say, ooh, do I want to try and rush the save to deny the token? But then possibly get downed at the hook and then get rehooked. And then the killer might just pivot back into hook states. Hard to say. It'll be some interesting decision making, and I really like the idea of that. Right? So yeah, if you want the token, you have to get away from the hook. And then, of course, after you get enough tokens, then the killer can start to mori survivors regardless of how many hook states they have. And so this lets you look at the game and be like, okay, am I going to win by going for hook states and killing a survivor out of the game so that I can snowball and get the survivor numbers down to a more manageable level? Or do I start stacking tokens until I get to the point that I can just start downing and moriing people? The end result of the token system basically means that all 4 survivors are going to stay alive and be in the game, playing the game and having fun for the majority of the match. And then once people start dying, they all start dying about the same time. Now, this is a flat out buff to survivors because having 4 survivors in the match is dramatically more powerful than having 3. But the token system is also a huge buff for killer, with the side effect of adding this really interesting ramping mechanic where the killer is less scary at the start of the match, but as they hit that token count, suddenly becomes very scary. The other cool thing about that is that this is like Act 3 of a horror movie when, the killer hits the really intense bulldozer mode and things get scary. I think a lot of killers really want that too. Like, where do I get to be the scary guy? And I think that's it, right? That gives the killer that aspect. It is a win-win. All 4 survivors get to stay alive longer. They get to play the game more. They get to have fun, even if they're just casual players. But then the killer gets to get to the point where they get to be a killer. They get to be scary, and they get to do all those sorts of things as well. Plus, it gives a really, really good balancing tool for behavior, where if killers are too overbearing, they can just add another token or 2 or how many ever tokens they need to add to the token system. And they can even make the token system a killer by killer system, meaning that Nurse would need a lot more tokens than, say, Trapper to get to that Mori state, which would also help alleviate the power gapping a little bit in the game. I think it's a really elegant, simple, clean solution that does a lot for the game and just makes it better for everybody. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't solve slugging, but let's do some collaborating. You guys get back in that comment section, brainstorm some ideas out. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section. Throw the likes, subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stuff like this. Also check out my shorts where I do a lot of Jackbox stuff. They're hilarious. I promise you'll like them. Anyway, that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.